Welcome back, y'all, to a discussion for a Torah portion. We have a double portion today, and we also have double the number of people talking about it. No, you're not saying double. This is, in fact, a multiplicity of people. Besides myself and Leonard, we have today with us Al Makarim and David Altman. And you guys are in town representing B'nai Yosef in North America. Check them out, by the way, at byna.com. They're doing some very interesting work.
Well, it's actually B'naiYosefNA.com, but...
Oh, is a full... I thought it was BYNA.
No, someone else got that domain name.
All right, well, we're off to a fabulous start here today, folks. So let's scoot past that before I turn redder, and let's go to... let's go to the discussion of this Torah portion. As a double Torah portion, there is a lot in here. And so I think we should just start at the beginning and run our way through it and see what happens. First thing in Numbers 19. This is, by the way, Numbers 19 through 25:9. Numbers 19, we have the red heifer. And for making of the waters of purification. This is tremendously mysterious to me. I mean, what's going on here, guys?
Well, I mean, I think it's funny that you started out in error, because that's kind of the entire point is, this was planned, yeah. Yeah, the red heifer is all about purification, all about correcting error, in essence.
Okay.
And so, I don't know, I read a thing of commentary, and I can pull up the name because I want to make sure I give him credit. But there was a guy named Barry Holtz who did a commentary on the mystery of the red heifer. And he was referencing the story of some old rabbinical teachings about it. And this rabbi was forced to justify what the red heifer was all about to a pagan. And he very simply said, well, you pagans are familiar with it. It's kind of like an exorcism, a Jewish exorcism. And the pagan was satisfied and went off. But the story didn't stop there. Immediately, the rabbi was challenged by his students and told, hey, wait a second, that's straw. That's a very simple answer, and it doesn't satisfy us. So we need you to continue. We need you to satisfy us. And he simply said, it's like the Lord's decrees are the Lord's decrees, and you have to believe what the Lord has said. And in essence, the paraphrase was very simply put that to a pagan, it's about, how would you say it, and I'll use his paraphrase because he said it so well. The pagan is told that the ritual is for like an exorcism, but the students are told is about our obedience to God. And so one is about exorcising the demons, getting bad things out of us. But in reality, what purifies is the one who blessed. And so the focus should be on not the complexity or the perplexing nature of the red heifer itself or the ritual. It should be the fact that he told us to do it and that he's the one that purifies. And so however he chooses to purify should be sufficient. And if it tests our faith, then that's an even greater test of our faith and proof to us that we actually do serve him and not serve reason or serve our understanding of him.
Okay.
Is that of the same order as why God commanded Abraham to take Isaac and slay him as a sacrifice?
To test his obedience?
And it specifically said that.
Yes. And then, of course, there's the prophetic picture with the Akedah of Isaac being a type of Messiah, Yeshua, and the ultimate sacrifice. Can I use that word? Okay. I mean, God taking the place as the ultimate atonement for the iniquity of mankind, which, I don't know if I can properly articulate the prophetic picture of the red heifer and where Messiah fits in there.
Well, notice one thing, too, though, is that Christ's first miracle is at the wedding at Cana,
Mm-hmm.
where he turns water into wine, and it's a lot of times it's missed that that water is actually the water of purification. This guy was, this guy was a high up guy, and he happened to have some at his house because I guess it's part of his job.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings, boy, a whole bunch more punch to that picture. I mean, it's not just a divine, beer run. It was.
No, it was wine.
It was still.
not
It was a
punch.
divine. Well, it was a divine wine run, but definitely. But I mean, what's up with that then? I mean, what?
Just for clarification, the water of purification was the water that was mixed with the ashes of the red heifer.
That's right. Yeah,
and,
we have here where, so the red heifer, I mean, just to sum it up very quickly, the red heifer is slaughtered, and everything about her is burned along with cedar wood, with hyssop and scarlet yarn, presumably. Or maybe it's just the dye, who knows, we don't know. And so that's cast in the midst of the burning heifer, and then you have those ashes, and then when you need to be purified, you run water through those ashes, and that makes the water of purification.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing that this is just one more place where God has provided a path of restoration.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that it's important that we understand why this all works. It's important that we understand that God said it and we do it. And, I was sharing earlier the story with my grandson when he was fussing with his mother. She told him to do something, and why? Well, as it turned out, God had just been dealing with me about something that week, and I came to the realization through prayer of I don't need to be asking why.
Mm-hmm.
I need to ask how. If I have a question, I ask how. So I knelt down because Mom was getting a little exasperated with the 4-year-old asking why, and I said, hey, you know what Grandpa has learned? When God tells me to do something I don't truly understand, I don't ask why. I ask how. And once we reach that point, then He can use us. And while, yes, the whole red heifer thing is perplexing, but what a blessing that it's there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm with you, Al, on the thing of it does also point to Messiah, because of, as I recall, where He was crucified was the place that the ashes were dealt with. There are a lot of places where the Messiah's crucifixion hinted at the red heifer as part of our purification. But it's been so long since I looked at those in detail, I can't share that.
Oh no, this is a very mysterious thing that's going on here.
Yes.
Well, is it ever explained? And that's the thing. All the other offerings that are given, it says this is a sin offering. This is an offering for this. Where is the description of the red heifer, what it's for?
Mm-hmm.
Where is that? Does it say this is specifically for unintentional sin, intentional sin? Is this for it's qualified who you use it with. It's qualified who it's for. Is it qualified why exactly? Which I think is another reason why it's particularly perplexing.
Yeah, now it does say what it's for, though. I mean, it is waters of purification, and it's after you touch a dead body.
Mm-hmm.
This helps purify you. So,
But it's not a sin offering.
but it's not an offering, no,
It's a water of purification. For what reason? You're unclean.
because you're unclean, yeah,
But
by way of death. I should
But
highlight.
if you wash with water, and wait until the evening, you're also purified. So why is this?
That's true, because in the other places where it says that don't touch a dead body, it says you wash and then you're unclean until evening, or maybe 7 days, I can't remember what. But it doesn't mention the waters of purification there, like in Leviticus.
Right.
It's pretty mysterious. Now, by the way, I should point out too, if you look askance at this, and I mean just coming from like a naturalistic point of view, or no, sorry, materialistic point of view, when you run waters through ashes, you make lye.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got all the components for a really nice soap.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't burn to cedar wood and hyssop, it's even a nice smelling soap. But hyssop also has antibacterial, antimicrobial properties, and so on. So I mean, I think this does something materialistic as well. But I don't think you need to go to this extent just for that.
But why not kill two birds with one stone?
Yeah.
Would that be 2 turtle doves?
Actually, it's one heifer, but you know.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, one heifer is worth 1 or 2 turtle doves. I think the equation works elsewhere.
Oh, you can vote.
A heifer.
Should we move on, or should I ask about another obscure detail?
Oh, we got time for another obscure detail.
Okay. Because it starts out, and the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, and then it goes on in verse 3 of chapter 19, and you shall give her to Eleazar the priest, that he may bring her forth without the camp, and one shall slay her before his face. All right, so command given to Moses and Aaron, but why are we specifying that it's Eleazar, the son of Aaron, who's going to carry out this command?
Well,
I mean, and here's why I say that. Why doesn't he just say a priest?
yeah. He's specifying the next in line. Now, could Aaron actually leave the temple or the tabernacle? Because they have to go outside of the camp for this.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
Aaron, as the high priest, cannot be defiled by a dead body.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, because this whole process of creating the ashes from the red heifer makes the priest unclean. So the high priest could not make himself unclean because he has to serve in the Holy of Holies.
Well, there's an interesting thought process there as well, because now you're preparing for the next generation perpetually,
Mhm.
because you're never going to have a time where you're unprepared for the next high priest to take over.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting thought that you can see succession in this.
Yeah.
And you can designate somebody as being your successor by having him be the one who observes or oversees, let's say, the slaughter of the red heifer.
So then is that why Eleazar specifically is named here?
I think that's a safe assumption, but
It seems reasonable.
yeah.
I mean, there's another son. There's Ithamar. Why is he not mentioned?
But Eleazar succeeds Aaron
Yes.
at the end of this portion.
In
or
this
next one,
portion.
actually.
In
Or in
this
this portion,
portion.
yeah.
Mhm.
Aaron dies in this portion.
And he takes over as high priest.
Yes. So perhaps this is, I mean, I'm just looking at the juxtaposition of these two incidents within the same Torah portion.
Mm-hmm.
The red heifer, the instructions to Eleazar to carry this out, and then a couple of chapters over, Aaron dies. Of course, Aaron's death follows Miriam's death. We'll get there in a minute.
Yeah. Well, look, and I'm really going out on a limb here. Do you guys know of anything from, like, say, the oral Torah, the Talmud, those sources? How often did they slaughter a red heifer? And where I'm going with this is this part of the succession? Do you start off with, like, as you're approaching your moment where you take over the garments, that's the thing that you do? You create a fresh set of ashes from which to make waters of purification. I mean, I should be clear here, folks, it does not say that in the Bible. And I'm really reaching here. But I wonder if there's anything else out there that you guys have run into that might indicate something along those lines.
I have not. I turned to Leonard.
I have not, but it sounds reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
But absolutely speculation.
Yeah, totally speculation.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, on that speculative note, we continue with another. This starts in verse 20, and we have another watery story here. And this is another time when Israel needed water. And God commands Moses to take a staff And unlike the first time, not strike the rock, but speak to the rock to bring forth water. And he instead strikes it. And because of that, he is punished by not being allowed to go into the promised land, which is a terrible punishment for a guy who just spent 40 plus years getting Israel out of Egypt, rescuing them, being God's right hand.
Who is referred to as the most humble of people.
Yeah.
Who, I mean, his character is, in the Jewish culture, is above reproach.
Mm-hmm.
And yet he's punished. I mean, nothing could be worse than being so close to something that you can touch it.
Yeah.
And not.
Yeah, it's very, I don't know, bittersweet maybe.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on here, guys, though? Why does he take the staff? Why does he strike it instead of speaking to it? Why does God tell him to speak it to the rock? Any thoughts?
Well, the first time around, God told him to take a staff and hit the rock and provide water.
Yeah.
Now he tells him to take the staff and speak to the rock. Where are we at in the chronological order of things here? They're really close to entering into the promised land.
Yeah, they're at the end of their wandering.
They're at the end of the wanderings. We're dealing with a generation of Israel that have been, little short of 40 years of 6 days a week there's manna on the ground. Seventh day of the week there's not manna on the ground. Next week we got the same thing going on. We've seen the miracle of God with our own eyes. We've seen his glory. And now at the end of these journeys, Moses, go out in front of Israel with a staff in your hand. All of Israel knows that the last time they needed water, he struck the rock and water came out. So go up to the rock with the staff in your hand and speak to the rock.
Mm-hmm.
And God says that in verse 12, because you did not trust in me so as to cause me to be regarded as holy by the people of Israel, you will not bring this community into the land I've given them. So his striking the rock instead of speaking to it, God took really serious.
Yeah.
I propose that the whole thing that's going on is that he's speaking to a mature Israel. The first time that he struck the rock was right after they left Egypt. Okay, he wasn't dealing with mature Israel. So he struck the rock, water came out. Okay, great. Now you take your staff that represents the old way of doing things, and instead of doing things in the old way, you speak to the rock. You use my ruach, my breath,
Yeah.
the words I gave you, and you allow Israel to see the water come forth now with words instead of force. And that's where that's what I think we see going on here.
There is another thing I have heard. I'm sure there's a Talmudic explanation. I just don't know the Talmud, but I have heard this in a teaching once before. How does this chapter begin? Then came the children of Israel, even the whole congregation, to the desert of Zin in the first month, and the people abode in Kadesh. And Miriam died there and was buried there, and there was no water for the congregation. And they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. And the people chided with Moses and spoke, saying, Would God that we had died when our brethren died before the Lord. Okay, so that's the first three verses. That brings this. Obviously, Moses is a little upset and overwhelmed at the stress of the situation. Why? Well, here's what I've heard. Moses is the one Miriam is the one who sings the songs of praise when they get to each camp, and she is the one who leads the ceremony, whatever it is that happens, that brings the water forth. She's speaking to the rock.
Yes.
She's not there anymore. There's no water. Moses is frustrated at, well, grieving the death of his sister, for one thing. And the people come to him and say, okay, water, we need this now. And Moses is saying, on top of all this, you want me to do this now for you. And so God's trying to say, I got this, Moses. I can handle it for you. Do what I say now. And you've got the example of your sister for the previous 38 years, okay? Speak to the rock. Moses apparently is not able at that moment to take the cue. And from a empathetic standpoint, I can picture the frustration that he has, the anger, the grief, the anguish over all of this. And in that moment, he reverts to what he knows before, which, Leonard, as you said, first time, all right, hit the rock. And then delegate to Miriam, and she handles it from now on. Well, there's no Miriam. What now? Uh-oh.
Well, and to add to that, the Rambam says that Moses sinned in becoming angry, and basically the sin was compounded because the people assumed that whatever Moses said was a reflection of God's will. And ultimately, God holding Moshe to such a higher standard was because he ruined the image. And that, in its essence, because he was held to such a high regard, would ultimately keep people from understanding the process, the method, the nature, the image of God. And so that's why it was treated so harshly. Whether, I mean, I'm paraphrasing him, obviously, but that makes a little bit of sense. It seems harsh, but if you look historically at the concept of people being made an example of, it's very possible that that's what this is. And being as humble and being as devoted as Moshe was, would he really hold it against God that he be made an example of for the betterment of God's community?
Probably not.
No. And what's the image though here that he's ruining by not speaking?
Because him striking the staff, him doing it by force, Moses' force, instead of speaking forth and God, the breath of God, causing the water to flow, made it appear that Moses was the source instead of he who blessed him. That's one of the concepts. That's the construct.
Yes, that's how I understand it, yes.
Yeah. Is there anything that we can read into this by the fact that we've got a rock here and we're getting water, which is life-sustaining from it? And Christ is called the rock of our salvation,
Yes, actually.
And, he gives us living water.
Twice.
Yeah.
And the first time he struck.
Yeah, so the first time, his first coming, he's struck, he's crucified.
But the second time he's supposed to be.
Ow.
Yeah, there you go. 1 Corinthians 10.
Okay.
Now, I'm reading from the authorized version. I just happen to like King James, all right?
Spoken from Mount Sinai, right?
I'll just leave that right there. Okay. 1 Corinthians 10, Paul says, "Moreover, brethren, I would not that you should be ignorant how that all our fathers were under the cloud and all passed through the sea." Mind you, I will point out here, he's writing to the congregation in Corinth, this Greek and Jewish congregation. So when he's saying all our fathers, he's not addressing just the Jews. Obviously, everybody there, whether they're Jewish or Gentile, he's including all of them as these are all your fathers too. All right? Spirit of adoption as sons. That's what we have in Messiah Yeshua. Does this whole book apply to us? Yeah, that's what the apostle's telling us. He continues, "And were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat, and did all drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. So there is the picture exactly that's been said just now. The first time around, Messiah was bruised for our iniquities and chastised for our peace. So the striking the rock brings forth the water that gives life. Do it again? Well, wait a minute. I read in Hebrews that there's only one atoning sacrifice of Messiah. Okay, so yeah, he did mess up the picture, the prophetic picture. But there is still a prophetic picture that Moses did not mess up and probably could not have. It still worked out. Who succeeded him as leader of the children of Israel?
Joshua.
Yes. So Moshe can bring us up to the promised land, but it's Yehoshua who brings us into it.
Nice. And Joshua, of course, is the Joshua and Jesus are it's the same name.
Yes.
It's Yehoshua or Yeshua, and then over the languages that got turned into Jesus as it got transliterated.
Yes.
Salvation from God.
Yeah. So Joshua, Moses' Joshua has the same name as our Christ.
Right. So there's the picture. The goal of the Torah is Messiah.
Well, it's interesting because Moshe is almost always, the Moshe seat where you read the Torah, Moshe is just completely and totally connected with the law and with the Torah. And so when the rock was being struck to bring forth the water, what was the rock being struck by? It was being struck by the law.
The lawgiver's staff.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And so when the law speaks forth and water flows forth from the rock might be a little bit of a prophetic picture of the nature of who we are and what we're supposed to be doing when the Messiah returns to bring forth the water again.
You guys were pointing out that Joshua and Yeshua shared the same name. Might be a good time. Joshua, the one that followed up Moses, went on the mountain with Moses. His name was changed. It started out as Hosea. Moses changed it to Yehoshua. And he was known as Yehoshua ben Nun, which means the salvation of God carrying on the family authority for perpetuity. And Yeshua, proper name, would have been Yehoshua ben Yosef, which means the salvation of God carrying on the family authority. And I'll do it again. Interesting little tidbit there.
I like it.
So,
all right, so this is a picture of Christ then, which would explain, of course, why God had to punish Moses to the extent that he did, because he had to make sure that the real picture was being accurately conveyed.
It stands to reason.
Yeah.
Now, are we correct?
We don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah, it doesn't say that. That's a supposition, I suppose.
Yes, we just want to avoid dogmatism whenever possible.
yes, but is there something here to be learned? If we are correct, and obviously we think we are, because we wouldn't be going to all this trouble if we thought we were incorrect.
Everyone's correct in the first person. It's only in the third person that someone becomes incorrect.
Yeah, there you
He's
go.
wrong.
God had to correct him, as in Moses, because he didn't. Yes, the prophetic picture was messed up, but at the same time, Moses was the leader, and as we talked about, the importance with the red heifer was not so much the why as you just do. And leadership, more than anyone else, needs to just do. As leaders, we need to set an example of doing what God says.
Well, therein lies of a potential trap. Because yes, I agree with you wholeheartedly. But when we think God's saying something and we're wrong, and we wholeheartedly do what we think God's telling us to do, and we're wrong about it, you will never fall harder.
Yes, but in that situation, doesn't that become a object lesson for anyone watching?
Oh, absolutely.
Therefore, turning you into a good leader?
Well, and my point would be that, all things, for those who believe, God turns all things towards good. It doesn't mean that everything done is good,
Correct.
but it will all end up towards his benefit and towards the benefit of all those who believe. So,
Yeah, but God may still have to pull your fat out of the fire. I mean, in the process of that.
or you may never get to go home.
Right,
So,
as we have here.
And since none of us are perfect, I would change that may to a will,
Yeah,
because we all need his help.
yeah. And it was just the previous Torah portion here, too, where it says, and I've been looking for it, but couldn't find it, that, the responsibility for what Israel does is placed on the priesthood
Yes.
and on the high priest in particular.
Anything
And
done wrong, yes.
we have the corresponding tie-in of that means they get the tithes and then they tithe to the priesthood, so there's some benefit to that as well. But it's very close here to Moses taking a pretty sizable hit for not following
well,
what Christ says.
what is the benefit that Moses gets for being the leader? Because, the
It's been a pretty thankless job so far.
Yeah, it's been a pretty thankless job. And what exactly is the reward that he gets? He gets buried on a mountain? Ultimately, it's an interesting corollary, because what's the thanks that Yeshua got for dying on a cross for us? Ultimately, whoever takes the position of, the person who leads, there's not a whole lot of reward. In fact, there's the old comment that duty is the sublimest word in the English language. One can never do more, and one should never wish to do less. And the etymology of the word sublime is directly, it's about something that's awe-inspiringly destructive, but you can't look away like a train wreck or a tornado. Duty, or the expectation of he who wears the crown or the person who's leading, the expectation is everything, and the recompense is nothing. It does nothing but drain and take from you. And yet, there are some people who are just called to lead. And bringing, the last Torah portion, which Korah, think about what rebellion really is. It's literally turning on a person who is dedicated to serving his people with no recompense. The same thing with rebellion against God, rebellion against Yeshua, two entities, one entity. It's just the entity that literally his benevolence is beyond reproach, and he wants absolutely what is best for you in this world, and you want to fight him? You want to punish him for wanting what's best for you.
But we do that all the time.
Well, we do that to ourselves.
Of course we do. I had another profound thought.
All right.
It may have just gone out my ear. It'll come back if it needs to.
Okay.
It was there. It was really there. Shall we go on to the Edomites?
Yes, let's go on to Edomites, and afterward Aaron dies as well.
Yeah.
All right. What do we got?
Let me just tell you that from a state policy standpoint, it doesn't make any sense to let 3 million people come through your territory.
No.
So I'm sticking up here for the Edomites, who said, what? You want to take your whole nomadic population directly through our territory to go over there and fight those people over there with whom we have diplomatic relations. No, absolutely not.
Come on, that's just devil's advocacy.
I'm speaking as a policy wonk.
Yeah, it does seem pretty scary. I mean, and at this point, they've had a few fights at this point, right?
But they're asking nicely.
But
Yeah,
they're
right.
asking nicely, so it's like,
I mean, can you imagine
Who
the
in, you know-
rumors that are going on about this wandering group in the desert and all the miracles that are associated with them? And I don't care how nicely they're asking. If you're asking, I'm going to answer no.
yeah.
Now, I know that if you choose to do what you want to do from the rumors I've been hearing, it's going to happen. But if you're asking, no, I don't think I want that in my backyard.
What he said. And you'll notice that there was no negative repercussion against the kingdom of Edom because of this.
Correct.
And also, by the way, because they're part of the family.
Wait. Because ultimately you go forward and you look at Nehemiah,
Mm-hmm.
and who are the two groups that are basically described as never being allowed in? Isn't one of them?
Yes.
So if you actually if you go and look back at the character of the two tribes that are considered to be foreigners, and just those people, no, they're not allowed to have covenant with God. The character of the peoples that were in those groups were people who stood in the way and did not offer help, and then actively pursued the destruction of Israel.
Yes. So, I didn't say there were negative repercussions immediately.
Well, I was just
No,
going by
that's good.
what happened before I cut you off.
And considering certain campaigns against the Edomites, cutting off is a literal thing, isn't it? Just saying.
Yeah, I've got to express something here.
What's that?
I am really enjoying this, and if you've never had a real life application of there's wisdom in a multitude of counselors, we're experiencing this. This is a much richer discussion than we're used to.
It's pretty
And-
fabulous, yeah.
I'm thoroughly enjoying it.
Yeah, this is pretty great. So you guys need to move up here and become part of our regular discussion group, I think is what Leonard's saying. And I agree. So it's settled.
I think I can speak
Meanwhile.
for David. We would love to be part of the discussion at any time that the Lord permits. So, yeah, you will come back. We'll come back.
Excellent. I will
Yeah.
hold you to that.
Okay.
So Edom was the children of Lot, weren't they? So they're related.
No, this is
Was
this
it?
is
Or
Jacob's
was it-
brother Esau.
Or Esau. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm getting them confused with who's Lot's kids?
That would be Moab and Ammon.
Okay.
Which are coming.
Which
Yeah,
are
they're coming.
Yeah, they're coming up.
They'll get theirs.
Yeah, but Edom gets away with it. So Esau, children of Esau, Edom gets away with it. Sihon doesn't. In
No,
the next Torah portion.
because they're not part of the family.
Right.
But then Aaron dies.
Yeah. And they seem to. Well, I mean, he's an old man at this point, so I mean, you can't say you didn't see it coming, but they climb a mountain and hand over the office on top of the mountain, and then Aaron dies on the same mountain. So they timed it perfectly.
Or was
apparently.
it climbing the mountain that killed him?
Oy.
He was that close. I just had to push him over a little. Okay.
Can you imagine? I mean, when I hear of this, I think of. It reminds me of some of the stories I've heard from the Native Americans where they kind of time their death, they wander off. Can you imagine walking so close with God that, okay, it's about my time, I need to do this, come on, let's go on this journey. You pass the mantle on and you die. how peaceful.
Well, and there are many instances, and I've family members that I've known and stories that I've heard of, and I've been there when it's happened, where someone had something that they wanted to achieve, something that they just had to hold on for, and they did, and then when that thing was achieved, they let go, and their system just shut down. Because they were done. They were satisfied. They were at peace now. And so whether the peace was before or whether it came with the completion of the task that they had committed to finishing. I mean, one of the greatest examples was Ulysses S. Grant. Died very shortly after completing his memoirs. I mean, the man was a bulldog. And he just didn't stop until he finished what he set out to do. And when he finished his memoirs, he died. So.
And by the way, Grant's memoirs are still an excellent read.
Of both volumes.
Yes.
All right, so Aaron dies, and the high priesthood gets passed on to Eleazar. And then Canaanites attack Israel, and then we have fiery serpents. Unless we had some more about Aaron before we moved on. No, okay. Fiery serpents. So they get bit. There are fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and many of the people died. And then they appeal to Moses, and God tells Moses to make a serpent. He makes it out of brass, set it up on a pole. Everybody that is bit by a serpent and looks on it will live. What is going on here, guys? I thought we weren't supposed to make a graven image, for starters.
I'm thinking of the words of a motivational speaker that a couple of lifetimes ago I used to listen to. His name was Zig Ziglar. And he says, I meet somebody and I ask him, how you doing? Pretty good under the circumstances. What are you doing under there? Get out from under there. That's what I think of here. The serpents were biting them. They were concentrating on their earthly circumstances. And God had wanted them to turn their eyes to the heavens, and devised a way to do that. Now, the way the way it went forth, I'm still a little disturbed by, but I think that's what was happening here. That's what I see. He was teaching people not to be concentrating on your circumstances, but to be concentrating on God's ways.
Which is directly correlated to the confusing nature of the red heifer and a reinforcing of you need to be focused on what you're told. Just do it. And I mean, it's such a short statement. I mean, it's not expounded upon, it's not explained, it doesn't seem directly correlated with anything else. It's just this brief little, oh, by the way, and there's this big brass serpent that if you look on, you won't die from poison. So
seems to be completely out of place.
Right. But it's yet again, maybe it is actually because when you're talking about math, right? And you're talking about a line, the more points of contact you have on the line, the more accurate the line is. If you take a single point of reference and you try to make a line out of it, you can make any line that you want. So perhaps these oddball things that get thrown in are to give you context so that you don't lose perspective on what it's actually pointing you towards, which is obedience over understanding.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Yeah. And of course, we don't get the full context of this until centuries later when Yeshua says, just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up.
And that brings a huge point, because a lot of these little thrown in things, I've often said that, the Pentateuch and the Old Testament as a whole, I mean, particularly the Pentateuch, that's like the movie. And anytime you have a movie, you've got all these people saying, oh, what it means to them. Oh, look at this. So there's all these commentaries, and you've got all these commentaries. Well, then Yeshua comes down, and you have the director's commentary. By the way, guys, this is what I meant. So.
Let me point out why we had fiery serpents. Because it says here in chapter 21, verse 5, this is after they've gone all the way around the land of Edom, because the Edomites stood on policy and wouldn't let their land be invaded. And the people spoke against God and against Moses. Wherefore have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? Oh, we've heard that before. For there is no bread, neither is there any water, and our soul loathes this light bread. Uh-oh. Well, who's complaining? Is this the remnant of the generation that's been complaining for the previous 3.5 decades? Or is this their children? And I have heard it said by one teacher that these serpents were already there in the desert. It's just, here we have once again the people testing God with the same complaints. You'd think by now they'd know. And lo and behold, God removes his protection from the serpents, because they're focused on the circumstances rather than providence and the heavenly goal that he's taking them toward.
And I think that's something that we really need to keep in mind in understanding this. Once again, remember, we're just a few steps away from crossing the Jordan into the Promised Land. This is God separating the wheat and the chaff.
But let's think about that, because here we are in Numbers, reaching the place right before you go into the Promised Land. And we don't get into the Promised Land until Joshua. So
Right. The final preparation, but
it's a long preparation.
Yes.
There's a lot of stuff that needs it, because and we talked about this previous, but this chapter, this Torah portion is primarily about the things they need to get out of them. But the next one is about all the fiery darts that the enemy is throwing at them specifically.
Well, and that might be a good segue into the next Torah portion.
And just kind of gloss over the fact that they defeated the two regional powers of the day.
Well, it's Og and Sihon, So okay,
Yeah.
let's go into that. So
Well, they're not anything anymore because they crushed them then.
who's ever heard of Og?
Precisely my point. Now, we gloss over this very quickly. I know when I'm growing up in the church, nobody talked about Sihon, king of Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan.
Yeah.
For one thing, Baptists couldn't pronounce the names right. But this was a big deal. This is like a precursor to conquering Canaan. Because these are the most powerful Canaanite kingdoms east of the Jordan. And it's a confidence-building measure of the Lord saying, look, I can do this. You doubted me. Here's yet more proof that I'm going to come through on my promises.
And this is the land, or I should ask it, this is the land that the half-tribe of Manasseh, they decide to stay here, right? Or is that a
Correct.
different spot?
No, this is the plan. It is in a next portion, but this is where Reuben and Gad and half Manasseh want to take the inheritance on the east side.
They have to make the promise that they're going to participate in the conquest and not just sit over there fat and happy.
Right.
Well, and while we're talking about this, I think it's, to be fair, we have to point out, Israel didn't just march in and overthrow them.
They were tactically sound.
Well, they sent messengers and asked permission to pass through their land. And instead of responding with no, they sent an army back and attacked Israel.
Right.
And so in defending themselves, they destroyed them.
Right.
It wasn't like Israel set forth to conquer them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that has to be mentioned to be fair.
That is pretty good, because you know what, there's a criticism of the Old Testament, or you know, God in the Old Testament, of, oh well, you told them to go kill all these people and all that. And well, first of all, there's truth to that, because he did. But we also point out that those were some instances. Many of the others are like this, where they were attacked. And furthermore, it also says that, you know, he is driving them out in front of them, like with the wild hornets and murder hornets through Israel.
Well, and this is another excellent segue, because if you want context as to why God made those edicts and how to understand that those aren't cruel and just unjust things, well, in the next portion we're going to see, you know, no, it's not the next portion. It's the portion after that. But you know, you've got what they try to do to bring in not eliminating your enemy and having an enemy that wants the worst from you. So Pincus has to go in and kill two people because they're literally hatching these mechanizations that are designed to destroy the people of Israel from within. God's judgment of destroying, you know, these people is not designed to harm. It's not designed to destroy. It's not some sort of vindictive act. It's an act of it's an act of protection. It's preemptive protection from what he knows will befall them if they allow people who are bitter, angry, all this kind of stuff for taking their land and all this stuff. What will happen?
Yeah.
And contextually, when you look at the chapters that come, I mean, Balak, the next chapter, this is someone who does wish Israel harm.
Yeah.
Who does literally hatch machinations to try and curse them and try and inhibit them from doing what God has told them to do. And it's even the next Torah portion after that goes even farther.
And it does say somewhere, I can't recall exactly where, but it does say that, you know, God tells Israel, it's not for your righteousness that this is happening and that you're being led into land, that these people are being killed, but it's because, you know, their wickedness has risen to overflowing, and this is why it took so long in Egypt, was to really let all the chickens come home to roost with the Canaanites that were there and the evil that they were plotting. I mean, these are the people that sacrificed their children to Molech, you know, and I mean, that's the most obvious worst of it, but they also had, you know, sexual rights involved in their religion that was very corrupting. There was various incestual things going on. I mean, it was quite endless. They were quite evil, you know, or their behavior, I should say, was quite evil as a people, and also, particularly with the sexual rights and all that, very attractive and corrupting at the same time.
To any weak individual.
I mean, because you get to go to church and sleep with a temple prostitute for free. I mean, this is, you know, now you see why, I mean, that, you know, Israel fell away again and again. I mean, they were surrounded by this kind of thing and variations thereof. Anyway, so we sort of whiffed by the segue into the next portion, because this is a double portion today.
Yes.
And this is Balak starting in chapter 22. And this is where Balak, the son of Zippor, is pretty scared about what he sees coming and sends for Balaam, who apparently, okay, who's Balaam, guys? Is he really a prophet of God, like Yahweh God, or is he what's going on here?
this is a great example of God working outside the nation of Israel.
Mm.
Balak was not an Israelite.
Mm-mm.
And I think it's safe to say he was not a servant of God. Yet he knew God and he heard from God.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to understand, because in today's society there are people that would say, well, I know God. I have a relationship with God. I don't necessarily have the same relationship with God that you do. Okay, well, Balak could have said that. What good did it do him?
Or Balaam, yeah.
Excuse me, Balaam. I keep getting the two
I
mixed
do it all
up.
the time, too, yeah.
The only one I can keep straight's the donkey.
Yeah, well, the donkey will set you straight, apparently.
Donkey's my hero.
The donkey was definitely...
Because, if God could use the donkey, I know he can use me.
Mm-hmm. There's a joke in there I'm not going to make.
I'm a little talking donkey.
And so,
But wait, did the donkey make waffles in the morning?
wow, we are so going to get sued.
They have algorithms for cultural references, you know. And that would be Shrek.
So, just in case you didn't know which lawyers we were going to hear from.
I'm terribly sorry. Can I get back to the scripture?
Let's do that.
All right, let me do that. Chapter 22. Now, okay, Balak, king of Moab, is afraid of these people. He's seen what happened to Sihon and to Og, these powerful kings who have actually gobbled up part of his land. He sees this, and so he does contract out to the prophet for hire, Balaam. And he sends 2 embassies to Balaam, saying, come, help, curse these people. First time, Balaam says, oh, no, God says I can't go. Second time, Balaam says, well, okay, let me ask God. And here's what God says, verse 20 of Numbers 22. God came to Balaam at night and said to him, if the men come to call thee, rise up and go with them. But yet the word which I shall say unto thee, thou shalt do. Okay, I got permission to go. Yay! And it says in the next day, Balaam rose up in the morning and, saddled his beast of burden. And then verse 22, it says, God's anger was kindled because he went. And the angel of the Lord stood in the way for an adversary against him. All right, guys, I got a question. Verse 20, God says, yeah, go ahead. Only speak what I tell you to do, but you can go ahead. And then in verse 22, God's ready to kill him. What is up here? Is God toying with Balaam? Why is he saying one thing and then goes back and does another?
Got to go back to verse 12.
Okay, and verse 12 says,
God answered Balaam, you are not to go with them. You are not to curse the people, because they are blessed. When God told him, okay, go ahead and go with them, it was because he did not heed what he'd already been told.
Good point.
He was being the petulant child that said, oh, come on, please. I really want to do this. Can I do this? All right. Go ahead and do whatever you want to do.
But don't come crying to me.
Yeah.
There's another aspect, too, where in verse 20, where God ostensibly gives him permission to go, he says, God came to Balaam in the night and said to him, if the men come to call thee, rise up and go with them.
Mm-hmm.
But yet the word that I say unto thee, thou shalt do. And it says, Balaam rose up in the morning, saddled his ass, and went with the princes of Moab.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mention that they came for him,
Mm-hmm.
or to call him.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if he had the attitude that you were just portraying there, was like, oh yay, I got the permission to go, except he skipped the step maybe.
Yeah.
He went to the messengers instead of waiting for the messengers to come
Yeah.
back to him.
Well, and in that you see what Yeshua was typically correcting people for in his day is he was often saying you skipped a step, or you forgot a step, or I mean, when he's talking about divorce and putting people away, he's like, you're not going through the whole process. You're saying you're going through the whole process, but you're only going through a piece of the process.
Yeah. This was allowed because of the hardness of your heart, but this wasn't the intention.
Well, that's a particular intent, but in that particular case, people were putting their wives away, and they weren't giving them a writ of divorce, and they were forcing them into adultery, which is why he said, if you do this, then you're actually the one that's guilty because you're kind of forcing them into it. And that's specifically what he was portraying, and both of those are true. So the answer is yes, obviously. But ultimately, you have this tendency of people where they take what God says and they omit a bit so that they can do what they want.
Mm-hmm.
So here we have an instance where Balaam obviously wants to do this.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's the key component. And both of you either what is the old phrase, either and either or both, but but could be correct on the concept. But the heart of Balaam wanted to participate in this.
Well, he wanted the reward.
Right. I didn't say what his motive was, but yes, he wanted to participate.
Yes.
Yeah, he did want the honor, and I mean, well, and he's for hire. Like, this wasn't like, oh my God, you're coming to pay me to curse? What on earth are you guys doing? What are you talking about? That wasn't his reaction. His reaction was, hey, I want to go. So, I mean, he did this thing for a living, no doubt.
Yeah.
What do we make of, well, first of all, Balak is a little hard of hearing, isn't he? He's a little slow of learning. 3 times, he's got to go through this 3 times. So Balak and Balaam make altars, and Balaam goes away and gets the word of God, which is basically blessings full of for Israel. And Balak's like, the king is like, okay, that was really unfortunate for me. Let's try it over on this other mountain. And he does that twice more.
Well, it has to be noted that this Torah portion is not called Balaam. It's called, Balak. And so while Balaam, his motivation is the reward. His motivation is helping Balak achieve his goal because he's paid to. What is Balak's motivation?
Well, he doesn't want his country. I mean, he's afraid for his country, for his position.
Balak is a patriot.
Yes.
Well, it's interesting because there's some interesting midrash in the Talmud about that, where Rashi and Rambam talk about who Balak is specifically, because there seems to be an understanding that he actually wasn't a Moabite. That
really,
yeah, and they say that all the Moabites had relied on the mighty Amorites and the king Shion and Og for protection, and they were powerless to stop the Jews. So surely Moab was in mortal danger. That's from Rashi. So they basically, when it says, although he was a king of Moab, his title is never mentioned here, possibly because he is renowned as a mighty warrior long before he became king. And they suggest that he may have even been a foreign-born national that may have been strong and capable.
Interesting.
Where does it say that he was a mighty warrior before he?
This is from the Talmud.
Oh, okay, I see.
Yeah.
I'm saying this is
gotcha.
yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Which is plausible. Now, from a governmental standpoint, what you said is right. He is concerned about his own country, about security of his own country. He's also concerned about his own neck. Because if what David has said is true, and I don't doubt it, perhaps there is a possibility here that his people might decide it would be in their best interest to make a deal with the Israelites And to do that, well, you have to get rid of the king. So, whether he's a
they are
patriot,
The
right.
peoples are related.
Yes, they are. I mean, the Moabites are also part of the family,
Yeah.
which is why God says you're not going to have any of the land of the Moabites or the Ammonites, because they too are of the house of Abraham. But whether it comes down as Balak, as a matter of policy and a responsible leader, is looking out for the security of his country in the best way that he knew how, or that he was looking out for his own neck, it's probably both the same thing. He was acting in human wisdom with the best that he, as a man, knew how to do. He didn't have the revelation of the Almighty God and didn't seek it out. So therein was his failing. And, once he's going down this path, he's got to get to the logical conclusion. And you could say it's insanity because he's trying the same thing, hoping to get a different result. No, there's no different result. So, okay, well, wait, Balaam says later, here's another way. We'll get there in a little bit. But Balak, he doesn't see any other way out, and it's in this case like Pharaoh, where we have he hardens his own heart, God hardens his heart. Either way, we get to the same result. Pharaoh has already chosen the path that he's going to take Egypt down. God just says, all right, let's continue on. Let's take this to the logical conclusion. I think there might be something similar going on here with Balak.
I just noticed too, as we were talking about this for the first time, I noticed Balak specifically has his guys go to Balaam of Peor, who we agree is perhaps a corrupted prophet of God, but he's a prophet of God, not a prophet of a pagan idol. Isn't it interesting that Balak sends for this guy, who is a prophet of the God of these people that he's terrified of, to do the cursing?
Well, they have proven themselves to have the mightiest deity from their perspective because they're just winning all these battles. I mean, that's how the mind thought at the time. If you're successful militarily, then that means that your God is the strongest. That's their concept.
Yeah.
And so, if you can't beat them, join them.
Yeah.
It's like we don't really have. I mean, ultimately, what Balak is intent on stopping the children of Israel at any cost. And that's proven by the fact that he's relentless. He tries and he tries and he tries. And when that doesn't work, the Moabites start sending their women to the camp for harlotry purposes.
So Balaam is worth his hire in that case because that's his advice.
It was his advice,
Yes.
yeah. But ultimately, you've got this dynamic that, is their fight, like you were saying, is this just self-preservation? Is their fight actually with the Jewish God, or is it with the Jewish people who are a threat?
Yes.
And so they might actually be trying to win over the Jewish God so that they might take him from the Jewish people.
Matter of linguistic clarification. What you've got here from a Jewish source would say, yes, this is the Jewish God. We're talking Hebrew Israelite.
That's absolutely correct, yes.
Okay, so this is the God of Israel, which includes the Jewish people, but it's not just Jews here.
Correct.
Okay, just that matter of clarification.
That's a party foul in our circles here, David. You should know that.
Yes, you make the waffles tomorrow.
I'm used to being an outcast, so I'm good.
Hey, let me point out one. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm going to step all over you for a minute because I want to complete this thought. Why did Balak go to Balaam, who's somehow or other got a line in to the God of Israel, among other gods? I think we have an explanation in 2 Kings 17, which explains the Assyrian conquest of the northern kingdom of Israel. They take the northern tribes away, leave a remnant in the land. They bring in all these foreign people, and they bring their foreign gods, and then lions come and eat them. So what is the solution? Go to the king of Assyria, say, hey, the God of that country is not pleased. Bring back one of those priests. So they bring back some of the Ephraimite priests of Yahweh, who tells them how to worship God in the way we did, and they do that at the same time worshiping their own gods. So they just add to the pantheon and make sure they appease this God. So if you wonder, how is Balaam able to do this? Well, maybe that's a picture into what he's doing and why Balak goes to him.
And it's not going to be the last time in history that this is done. Ultimately, I mean, you see this throughout time. I mean, of Antiochus IV, before he goes to defile the temple and all of the temples in Israel, he was perfectly cool with, just adding the Jewish God to the pantheon of the Greeks.
Yes.
And so, I mean, this was a common practice. I mean, what's one more off the skin off our back, kind of concept.
Paul talked about the temple to the unknown God, and that was, as I've heard it taught, that was the temple to Hashem. That was among the Greek pantheon, and
Right.
And by the way, you can say the Jewish God with Antiochus IV, because that was after both
That
the Assyrian
was.
and Babylonian cry. It's just the Jewish people there.
Yes, but regardless of the scepter will never, be taken from Judah. So
Precisely.
if you say the Israeli God, the Jewish God, the Hebrew God, how many names are used for each people group in the Bible? Oh, like 4, 5, 10. How many names does God have himself? Oh, how many? So when we start getting into semantics, we might be putting a little bit of a stumbling block unnecessarily, which is a wonderful lesson to all those people who might be doing that to someone else.
I wouldn't want to be cast as anti-Semitic.
Well,
Anti-semantic.
Leonard, you were saying.
well, the thing that I find interesting here is we have Balaam, he says, let me go talk to God and find out what he lets me say. He's very adamant. After all this, I can't say anything unless God lets me. And I find it very curious that Balaam had enough of the fear of the Lord that he was only going to speak what he was allowed to speak, but he did not have enough fear of the Lord that he would not teach the Moabites how to have Israel curse themselves. It seems, it's confusing to me. How can you know God well enough to know that I can only speak what he lets me speak? But I can teach you this underhanded way to get the job done that you want to do. There wasn't enough fear of the Lord to be afraid of doing that.
That's a fair point. You've got to ask yourself, I mean, quite literally, you have to ask yourself, why is it okay to openly disobey? And I'm rephrasing what you're saying. Why is it not okay to openly disobey, to just directly go in opposition, but surreptitiously to disobey is okay?
And one of the reasons I bring up this question, because I see it so much in our society today, we're going to legalistically follow these things, but we're really going to do what we darn well please.
Well, isn't the best way to recognize the flaw in yourself to see it in others, and see it in others who personify something that is particularly repugnant to you? So if you take the character of Balaam and the character of Balak, and you take those two individuals, and they are representative of people who are absolutely set on cursing Israel. And you take a look at how they go about their business, and then you realize that you in your own life are doing that. that you are saying, well, God told me to do this, but I can, maybe there's a little bit of leeway here. He said I could go, he said he didn't say I couldn't, so I can. Or he said I couldn't curse them, but you know how you can get around that. You know how we can lead right up to Sabbath and work. Just like let's get as close to the line as possible, which always got people in trouble.
He said pig ain't food, but you know what? They didn't have refrigeration, and we do, so it's okay now.
Right. Or taking in particular, if you take the cleanliness laws with regards to food and you say it's about health. And it's about of illness, and knowing what we know now, that it's not as relevant because we're still staying healthy. Yeah.
It makes it all okay.
It makes it all okay because we know how to break those rules but still stay healthy, and it's all about us being healthy. And I of course am playing devil's advocate and kind of shedding a light on. It's not okay because what we just read in the previous chapter about you just have to hear and do because we don't necessarily understand all the reasons why.
Well, I can do whatever I want on Sabbath. After all, I'm not spending any money, so I'm not breaking the Sabbath. I can go to this party and do this thing with all these people that have no regard for Hashem or his Sabbath, and because I'm not spending money, I'm not breaking Sabbath. That's okay.
Well, what's ironic about that? Is that what's the first Talmudic, rules in Scripture? It's in Nehemiah. It's the three, you don't marry your children off with foreign nationals for people who have a different faith. You don't buy and sell on Sabbath. That's an addition. Now, it's very dangerous to say that because, maybe I can do my shopping online and it's with all these horrible people. It's like, oh my, look at what I can do. But no, the reason why they added that is because very specifically, Nehemiah said it. He said the reason why we're pointing this out is every single time that we did these things, we turned away from Torah.
Right.
And so it is as keeping Torah that we're keeping ourselves from profaning Torah.
Well, in our final section here is exactly what happens, and we'll have to be quick about this. We're a little tight on time here, but the Moab rather sends in their daughters, and they tempt the people of Israel to worship Baal, and again, it's this like sexual enticement. Mm-hmm. And it's exactly what you're just talking about there with Nehemiah, that put a stop to that. Mm-hmm. Because, you were allowed to marry foreign women, but as in this case, it turns them away. Mm-hmm. Well, I appeared to have said all that needs to be said on the subject. Well, this doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, there's a lot I want to talk about, but it'll get us into next week's portion, and
we should go ahead and leave that for next week.
And it is important to mention that next week's portion comes from this ending because the spearing is now.
Right. All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I certainly did. And join us again next week for another Torah portion and another discussion. And there will be indeed sparing, and we'll talk about that. See you then.
Baruch Hashem.